I didn't know the lake existed until the lawyer slid the map across the table. It was a wide, blue sprawl labeled in tiny print, 3,100 acres. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some cartography error or an old family joke that had gone too far, but the deed was real, the signatures were real, and the man across from me was very serious when he said, "Congratulations, you are now the sole owner." The lake had belonged to my great-uncle Raymond, a man known in the family more for his silence than his success. He'd lived alone near the water for decades, paying his taxes, refusing help, and never explaining how he came to own something so vast. When he passed, there were no children, no spouse, and no will contest. The lake came to me like a secret finally tired of being kept. I visited it a week later. The water stretched beyond what my eyes could comfortably hold, broken only by docks, boats, and expensive-looking homes clustered along the eastern shoreline. A neat stone sign welcomed residents to Clearwater Shores, a private lakeside community managed by the Clearwater Shores Homeowners Association. At the time, I didn't think much of the sign. I parked near the public access ramp, at least what I assumed was public, and walked the shoreline. The lake was alive. Kayaks slicing the surface, fishermen casting lines, children laughing from wooden piers. It felt good knowing this place was part of my family's legacy now. I had no intention of changing anything. I wasn't there to flip land or kick people out. I just wanted to understand what I had inherited. That illusion lasted exactly 3 days. The first letter arrived by certified mail. It welcomed me to the neighborhood and immediately informed me that, as the new owner, I was required to comply with HOA regulations governing lake usage, shoreline access, dock placement, boating hours, and aesthetic consistency. I reread the letter twice, convinced I had misunderstood. They were telling me how I could use my lake. I called the number listed at the bottom. The woman who answered spoke with the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed. She explained that the HOA had managed the lake for years and that ownership, while technically mine, didn't change their established control. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger, yet, but curiosity. Because my Uncle Raymond had never liked being told what to do. And suddenly I understood why he'd held on to the lake for so long without saying a word. 2 days after the phone call, I received a second letter, this one hand-delivered and tucked neatly into my mailbox like a warning dressed as courtesy. It outlined the Clearwater Shores Lake Governance Agreement, a document I had never signed, never seen, and never agreed to. According to them, the HOA controlled shoreline modifications, water traffic, fishing permissions, and even who could legally access certain coves of the lake. What caught my attention most was one sentence near the end. Failure to comply may result in legal action or restricted access to HOA-managed waterfront areas. That wording wasn't accidental. It was a flex. I drove to the HOA office that afternoon. The building sat right on the water, glass walls, manicured hedges, and a private dock extending into the lake I technically owned. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and confidence. 3 board members sat at a long table as if they'd rehearsed the scene. They spoke to me slowly, carefully, explaining that the HOA had maintained the lake for over 20 years. They paid for shoreline cleanup, dock inspections, and water testing. In their minds, that effort translated into authority. "You're welcome to enjoy the lake," the president said with a polite smile, "but we need cooperation to preserve property values." I asked a simple question. "Can you show me the agreement where my uncle gave you those rights?" The room went quiet. They shifted tactics immediately. Instead of paperwork, they leaned on pressure, lawyers, lengthy court battles. How expensive it would be for one individual to fight an established association. They assumed I would fold, sign their agreement, and let them continue as usual. What they didn't know was that I had already contacted a property attorney that morning. The next week, the HOA escalated. Residents were told that lake access might be limited due to ownership disputes. Signs appeared near docks stating private access, HOA members only. One even went up near the public ramp I had parked at during my first visit. That was when the complaints started rolling in, angry calls, confused emails, and one homeowner who showed up at my temporary rental demanding to know why I was threatening their lifestyle. I didn't argue, I listened. And I learned. Most of the homeowners believed the HOA actually owned the lake. That myth had been carefully cultivated over decades. Annual dues included vague lake management fees. Board meetings used language like our waters and community-controlled shoreline. No one had ever questioned it until ownership changed hands. Meanwhile, my attorney uncovered something interesting. The HOA had no legal claim to the lake itself. None. Their authority ended at the property lines of individual homes. Everything beyond that, the water, the lake bed, the access rights, belonged entirely to me. The HOA wasn't managing the lake. They were pretending to. And pretending only works until someone checks the records. Once the truth was clear, my attorney gave me options. I could sue for trespass. I could demand back fees. I could revoke dock permissions one by one and force the HOA into a corner. All of it was legal. All of it would be ugly. I chose something quieter. Instead of confronting the HOA again, I focused on the lake itself. The deed didn't just give me surface rights. It included the lake bed, the shoreline buffer zones, and, most importantly, exclusive authority over waterfront access easements. That meant no dock, pier, or boat launch was legal without my permission. For decades, the HOA had assumed those permissions existed by default. They didn't. My attorney drafted a single document, a formal notice of revocation and reclassification of lake access. It stated that all existing docks and shoreline structures were considered temporary and conditional, pending individual access agreements with the lake owner, me. Then we mailed it. Every homeowner received a copy. So did the HOA board. So did their legal counsel. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Emergency meetings were called. The HOA president sent a furious email accusing me of holding the community hostage. Residents flooded online forums, arguing over whether the HOA had lied to them or whether I was some opportunist trying to cash in. But the most important response came from their lawyer. He requested a meeting. We sat across from each other in a conference room overlooking the lake. He didn't threaten this time. He asked questions, careful ones, about my intentions, about whether I planned to shut down access completely. I told him the truth. I just want control over what I own. He nodded slowly, like someone realizing a chess match had ended several moves ago. Here's what the HOA hadn't anticipated. By asserting control over the lake without ownership, they had never secured permanent waterfront rights for their members. No recorded easements, no binding covenants tied to the land, nothing transferable. Their entire authority rested on assumption. An assumption doesn't hold up in court. Within 2 weeks, the HOA removed every private HOA access sign they had installed. Docks were suddenly labeled pending review. Boating rules disappeared from their website. Their power collapsed not because I attacked it, but because I withdrew permission. Waterfront rights are everything in a lakeside community. Property values depend on them. Without guaranteed access, those million-dollar views lose a lot of shine. The HOA tried to recover by proposing a blanket agreement, one contract, one payment, permanent access. I declined. Instead, I offered individual licenses, renewable every 5 years, issued directly by me. No HOA control, no collective authority, just property law, clean and simple. That was the move that cost them everything. Because once homeowners realized the HOA no longer controlled the lake, they started asking what else the board didn't actually own. The fallout didn't come all at once. It spread slowly, like a crack in ice you don't notice until the surface starts to give way. Homeowners who had relied on the HOA to handle everything were suddenly forced to deal with reality. Their waterfront access existed only because I allowed it. One by one, residents reached out. Some were polite, some were nervous, a few were openly angry, but every conversation ended the same way, with them realizing they needed a direct agreement with me, not the HOA. The licenses I offered were fair, transparent, and tied to actual property law, not vague promises buried in HOA bylaws. As people signed, something unexpected happened. The HOA lost its leverage. Without control of the lake, dues became harder to justify. Members questioned why they were paying for lake management when the lake wasn't theirs to manage. Board meetings grew tense, attendance dropped, then resignations started. The president stepped down first. Real estate listings followed. Properties that once advertised HOA-controlled private lake access had to be rewritten. Agents learned quickly to use phrases like licensed waterfront privileges instead. Buyers asked questions. Appraisers adjusted numbers. The market corrected itself. And the HOA? They tried one last tactic. They filed a claim asserting historical usage rights, arguing that decades of uninterrupted access had created a permanent entitlement. My attorney dismantled it in a single filing. Use without permission doesn't become ownership when the true owner never relinquished control. Especially not when taxes, maintenance responsibility, and recorded deeds all point in one direction. The claim was dismissed. With that, the HOA's authority over the lake ended officially and permanently. I didn't fence the shoreline. I didn't ban boats. I didn't turn the lake into a private playground. In fact, very little changed day to day. People still swam, still fished, still watched sunsets from their docks. The difference was who decided. The lake wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't controlled by committee assumptions or inherited power. It was governed by clear ownership and clear agreements. And the community, after the anger passed, adjusted. Sometimes people asked if I felt guilty. I didn't. Because ownership isn't about dominance. It's about responsibility. My uncle understood that. He protected the lake by staying quiet, letting others believe their stories. I protected it by telling the truth and putting the law back where it belonged. The HOA tried to control something they never owned. One move, revoking assumed permission, cost them their waterfront rights forever. Enjoying this story about HOA overreach and real property rights? Follow or subscribe to catch more real-world legal battles and unexpected inheritance stories like this. If this one made you think, give it a like and drop a comment below. Do you think the HOA genuinely believed they owned the lake, or were they counting on no one ever checking the records?